Hi, everyone. Welcome to the State of Decision Making panel. I hope you've all been enjoying Strategy Fest so far and have been gleaning some amazing insights on how to improve your strategy making abilities in your own organization. We're here to talk about decision making. I'm going to go ahead and share some slides before I introduce myself a little bit. So hello, I'm Francesca Cassidy. I am the Deputy Editor at media brand Raconteur, and I'm going to be presenting some research we published at the end of last year about the increasing complexity of business decision-making. I'm also going to be joined by three amazing business leaders who are going to talk about some of these trends and how they're playing out in their own organization. Before I begin, a little bit about the research. So we conducted a survey of 1,100 UK business leaders in companies of 250 employees or more across 4 seniority levels: manager, head of, director, and CXOs, and across all departments and functions. So this is a really broad view of decision-making in UK business at the moment. And the most significant finding we came up with was that decision-making groups are getting bigger. Back in 2014, Gartner, the research consultancy that used to be CEB, found that there was an average of 5.4 people involved in every business decision. In 2016, that was 6.8. Our research shows that now the average is 11.4. Across the different seniority groups, we can see that managers are the most likely to be involved in small decision-making groups of 1 to 5 people. This could be because the decisions they make are more about the day-to-day running of the business, their own department, and less likely to have organization-wide impact. But we can see consistency across all 4 of these seniorities. Very few decisions are taken in groups of 5 people or fewer. And almost all of the groups said that there were 50% of them said that decisions involved 11 people or more, which shows that we can really hold true to this idea that decision-making groups are growing and growing. We also found that there is more cross-department functionality and collaboration than ever before. Business leaders are involved in 4 product or service lines outside their immediate function, which means that you can no longer work in silos and you can no longer be an expert in your function alone. You have to get a wider breadth of knowledge. 92% said that regular communication and insights from other departments were key to decision-making, but 83% said that they needed greater understanding of other functions, which shows that the problem is understood. People realize that they need to have this wider breadth of knowledge, but they're not getting that communication that they need just yet. So they're not getting that support from other functions. These are the most collaborated with functions. So finance and operations are sitting at the top, as you might expect. Apologies to the many of you, I'm sure, who work in PR and comms. People don't seem to be factoring you into their decision-making groups as often as you might hope, but you're in good hands. You're down there with the CEO and the managing director, which might be quite surprising because we are used to thinking of them as the top of the business, the person that makes these decisions. However, what we also found was that decision-making is becoming more egalitarian. When we started the survey, we wanted to understand what role seniority really played in decision-making. We all still work on this assumption that the most senior people in a business are the ones making the biggest or the final decisions. But our research suggests this is no longer true. If it were, these bubbles at the top next to manager would be smaller, and the bubbles towards the bottom for directors and CXOs would be bigger, but it doesn't show that. Even when we drill further into the data and we ask leaders about final sign-off for decisions in their own function, it isn't the case. Just to give you one example, only 50% of CFOs said they were the final sign-off for finance and accountancy solutions. So decision-making is becoming more complex, broader groups, and undeniably democratized. But is this a good thing? To explore, I am being joined by this amazing panel. We have Karim Zuhri, the GM and COO of Cascade. We have Pete Williams, the Director of Data at Penguin Random House, and Kristen Brown, who is the VP of Strategy at Schneider Electric. And I am going to stop sharing my screen so that we can hear their amazing takes on these findings. So Karim, I'm going to throw a question to you first. We found that these decision-making groups are growing and growing. Can 11 people ever really make a decision?
Oh, wow. I think when you ask this question, so many anecdotes and stories come to my mind. And first of them that is very irrelevant is asking my mom to have 11 cooks with her in the kitchen making her lasagna. That would not go well. I think on the other side of that spectrum, I think it always comes to my mind this story around the judges with the rectangle tables and the round tables. And some of people would say, oh, let's remove the rectangle tables from the judge court because rectangle tables make the people's on the head more dominant and more aggressive in the decision making, whereas the round table bring everyone together and hear everyone speaking and exploring and showing their context and knowledge, but also their opinions. And I think there is almost like positives and negatives to both approach of having a lot of people or not a lot of people in the decision making. I think the positives of having everyone involved is obviously, as I said, the context is getting everyone heard and feeling that they are part of the decision, which makes them actually have the buy-in. The negatives is actually sometimes it could make a lot of compromises on what the final decision is because you want to please everyone. And also it could delay the decision making. For me, a fast decision is sometimes much better than a very good late decision. We have heard from Matteo, we have heard a lot of books speaking about how fast decision making can be actually impactful for the business. So I think if we are bringing 11 people to the room to make a decision, we should actually decide on kind of the vote rights or how can we enable everyone to be heard, but finally end up with one decision maker or at least someone that can make the final word. You think about this story, I don't know if you've heard of it. It's a scientific expedition in Antarctica, and a group of researchers had this penguin, and it's a rescued penguin, and they wanted to like keep the penguin or just free them again. And they voted, and they had a tie, and then they put this fishbowl in both sides, one with a yes and one with a no. And the penguin went and said, "I want to stay," which is a very funny story, but like it made them realize that sometimes not every decision need that many people to be made. I'm gonna stop here because I can go for hours, but that's my take on decision making with 11 people.
And speaking of penguins, I feel like we ought to come to Pete. We can see that we're having more people involved in decisions than ever before, and that these decisions do result in greater equality, greater democracy. What role do you think that data is playing in this kind of democratization process?
I'm glad that's a serious question. I thought Karim was throwing shade at me there. So I think data is vital, and you'd expect me to say that being a data leader and that. But, my whole mantra now is about better, faster decision making. And it's all about making sure people are informed. So it doesn't matter what level of the hierarchy you're trying to put the decision making at. And I think increasingly people are being empowered further down. What's important is that you've got the right information to make the right decision. And at that point, it doesn't matter whether you've got 1 or 15 people. If you've got the right information, it's just going to look like common sense. It's not going to look like data-driven decision making. Getting the right information and understanding the right parameters, I think, is something that often isn't as well considered as it could be. The levers, or what I call the lead and lag indicators to any sort of KPI-based decision making, people put a lot on the lag. They don't put enough research into the lead to understand the levers that you could influence and drive insight from in order that your decision is the best informed it can be so that you can take it immediately.
Kristen, I see you're nodding. How do you feel about data and its role in kind of democratization of decision making?
Yeah, so everything Pete said, I fully agree with. So I run strategy for within Schneider Electric for our UK and Ireland region. And within our corporation, we have global lines of business, global product lines, so that I'm just looking at the statistic around kind of cross 4 products or service lines. There's probably 8 I can name from the top of my head that I know I need to be involved in. And so when we think about decision making based on data, for us, it's really think about it as vertical data. So what are we doing going from the region up to the global entity? And then horizontal data, how is that data that we're using to make the decision, to Pete's point, really carrying through operations and execution and being able to create a bit of a cyclical decision-making process and managing both that vertical data sharing and data alignment, as well as that horizontal stream of data from strategy through execution is not always it's easy easier said than done, I think. But I would 100% agree with Pete that the foundation of data presented in the right way really accelerates the decision-making process, because people know what information they need in order to make the correct, especially financial and operational decisions.
Can I jump in? Sorry to
course.
already rampage across the conversation, but I think this is key. Whenever I talk about data, the thing that really excites me compared to the old-fashioned decision-making and the old-fashioned organizational structures, it's the only thing that flows horizontally across the organization. I'm really glad you used that word, because in the past, we might have taken decisions with fewer people, but we took it with fewer understandings of the impact of the decision. We only look downwards from the top of our pyramid and go, this is fine for my team, but every decision in an organization has upstream and downstream implications. And if you don't consider those, then what you're doing could well absolutely sabotage somebody, somewhere else in your organization. And I think that's what data and a more egalitarian, data democratized company gets to see. That's why more people are involved, but that doesn't necessarily mean the decision process is longer or in any way subpar or not as good. I think actually it's better, because it should be understanding the full impacts rather than just a singular impact.
More nods from Karim. And Karim, I know you have strong feelings about the interplay between data and the human intelligence.
No, absolutely. I mean, for me, like, context is extremely important. You got to look behind the data. And Pete spoke about the lagging and leading indicators, but sometimes it's also correlation versus causation. Think about this. I don't know. I love examples where, like, you're talking about real life things. Think about a basketball team and the coach is monitoring every person's performance, and the star of the team is performing extremely well every time he comes to the match, and every time he was performing, he was eating a hot dog before. Now, he can go and then say to the entire team that you should eat hot dog just before you start the match, or understand that this hot dog maybe relates to something that this person makes them feel better every time they come and eat that hot dog before. So I think it's that context behind the data. We should ask more people, back to the 11 people that we spoke about. If we ask them what they think and why they think about something, they know better than the decision makers themselves. So if you go down into the hierarchy in your organization and ask why this data looks this way, you will get the best answer. This is the best data that will get you to the right choice and the right decisions.
And sorry, Pete, you look like you want to jump in.
Yeah, but I don't want to dominate the conversation, but I get so excited on this subject. Let me give you another very simple, quick example. I've spent a lot of time in food retail, and I've seen KPIs set inadvertently where the important statistic at the end of the day is that there's no wastage. So making sure you don't throw any food away maximizes, the food you bought and your sales. Unfortunately, that metric also turned around means you're probably missing out on a great deal of demand, because if you sold out, that means that somebody else probably wanted to buy it. So really what you want for wastage is to throw away one of everything at the end of every day, because then you can be sure that demand has been satisfied and you reach the peak at which people stop buying. But if you reach that peak at like midday and go, we've succeeded, all the sandwiches are gone, you've probably missed out on half a day's sales. And that's just crucial. And that's where you don't get the conversation between various pillars. You've got singular teams pushing their own agenda, coming up feeling like heroes, but actually sabotaging the organization. Needs a much bigger conversation. I don't know whether that relates to hot dogs and sport or not.
I think it's the food analogy, though. You spoke about.
We love it. We love the food analogy. And sticking with that idea of these broad decisions, Kristen, you mentioned before that Schneider Electric is a vast global organization. I'd love to just dive a little bit into the way that decision-making becomes increasingly complex when you are working internationally, where the leadership team is all over. So I'd love to know, how do you think businesses that work globally can approach making strategic decisions that affect the whole business?
So I think it's obviously a quite complex question, and the structure of the business, I think, quite informs the way in which you approach that. One of the things that I think is foundational, though, which gets back to the conversation that we were just having, was really ensuring that you are hearing from the people on the front lines of the business. So Schneider Electric, again, is a global organization. The strategy around our product, the strategy around our customer segments is often set by our global teams who focus on the portfolio level across the world, but the execution is owned by the individual regions. We love that approach because it means that we can centralize product development to help gain efficiencies, but we have a local approach to meeting consumer demand. The challenge that introduces, however, is it can often tie that global decision-making to anecdotes, to generalizations, and to what you often kind of hear as peanut buttering of data. And so what we start to do is really what we're really working on and implementing is a much more iterative, and to kind of pull from software, our true agile processes around making decisions and reprioritizing on a more granular cadence. So we're not setting and forgetting on an annual basis tied to the fiscal year, but we're really reviewing our resources, our sales strategies, our go-to-market channels much more frequently based on, to again, this point around data, what are the objectives that we set at the beginning? What are we seeing that's happening as a result of implementation? And why are those things happening? And that why we can only really get, again, to both what Karim and Pete have said, by talking to the people that are actually executing. And for us, that's critically important. So we're not just trying to think about what does global success mean, but really take the nuance of each of our individual regions and build something that works for us, our customers, and the type of interaction we have in the market.
Yeah, that part about what does the success mean in each country is so important. I worked for a large group of travel just a couple of jobs ago, and we had 22 brands, and each brand had their own strategy. And every time we tried to take a strategy from one brand that is, let's say, US based to the UK, it failed because I'm giving you an example here. The deals and how they work in the UK market do not work the same way as the US. So even if you build that kind of like technology behind it and you're trying to show someone a package where you can go to Disney and have the train and the car and everything for 30% lower, that same package wouldn't work the same way in London or in the UK in general. So culture and that regionalization is becoming more and more actually important because we are trying to globalize everything. Now, globalization doesn't mean one size fits all. And I think that part is extremely important.
I want to just zoom back in again. Having zoomed out to the whole world, I'd like to zoom back into some specific organizations. And maybe I'll throw this one to Pete first, because Pete, I know that data is the department in every company that people are increasingly knocking on the door of. I want to just sort of hark back to that slide that I shared in my presentation about cross-departmental collaboration. We can see that senior leaders know it's important to know more about other people's jobs, other people's functions, but that they're just not there yet. 83% say we still need to know more. We don't understand enough yet. What do you think can be done to improve this? I mean, both in terms of your function in data, how can business leaders know more about data, but also more broadly, how do business leaders get to know about other people's functions?
Wow, there's a lot of questions in one.
Sorry.
In the data industry right now, we talk a lot about data literacy. You know, the ability for people inside an organization to be able to recognize, consume, advocate, and argue with data and feel confident they know where it comes from, and therefore that it's valid for use and can drive the right decisions. And for some, that feels quite arrogant or antagonistic, where we as a data industry maybe don't understand the business operation enough. And so the sort of data literacy versus business literacy is the sort of thing we consume ourselves with all the time, worrying about the words. I think what's really important is that, you know, to Kristen's point, you can't globalize everything. You can't centralize everything. For me, I agree with centralizing all of the information because I want a consistent and robust source. And I've never yet been in an organization that's mature enough to capture lots of robust data around the outside and then trust it to pass it to one another, and that it's all going to be consistent and reliable. So that sort of centralization of data is really important to me. And then how people get to know each other. I mean, this is where I think that, you know, your slide on collaboration, which mistakenly did not capture the data department or wherever the data function lives. So I'm quite insulted by the whole thing.
Sorry.
But, you know, but I think the only thing that really gives you insight is either going to do the old fashioned thing, you know, spend a day in someone's shoes, sit in a department, learn about the decision-making processes in there, learn what they care about. And certainly as a, you know, sort of a data leader, if that's what you want to tag me as I've gone through various industries and led data transformations in all of them, you kind of recognize the challenges are often the same, but the local objectives, you know, in each function and in each different type of business vertical is what changes, and you have to be adaptable to the KPIs, objectives, and the relative commercial acumen to each organization. Writing a data strategy for a local borough council is very different to writing a data strategy for a global retailer, but they all have very similar problems at the heart, which is that trying to capture really good quality data and distribute it to the right people at the right time in order that supports the decision-making process is fundamental. So I think the other thing that you can do is doing the spend your time in the shoes. For a data team, I really don't want my team to stop at here's a dashboard, because that pretty much guarantees I've just there's a great influencer called Avinash Kaushik I really like, and he talks about data pukes. So I can't just puke all of my data onto a dashboard and say, there you go, here's everything I've got about that subject. I need to go back and then work out what they're doing with that data in order that I therefore understand the processes they're trying to drive, and I can refine the process so that I'm removing all of the human elements and giving them the key decision points. So I think it's vital that I do that. But I think it's also vital that organizations look horizontally along the data supply chain we were talking about earlier. And by looking up and downstream, you can't help but learn about what impacts everybody else's jobs around you. And that gets you a better understanding of what makes the organization tick. And this is why I think that data is the DNA of every organization. There is culture, there's all that sort of stuff that's really important about how you operate. But the thing that really joins your processes together is how your data flows through the organization. And I think it's the best thread you can pull on if you want to gain some insights as to what job really influences what business outcome.
Francesca, can I just add on that? Because I think that I don't remember which book this is from, but it's in some product management book around processes, the scaffolding of productivity. And I really love that because, I before I took this role, I was leading product in a couple different Series A startups that are more on the digital native side than a business like Schneider that has existed for the better part of a century. But I think what I try to drive in my team is you have to start with the process, because understanding the process helps us then understand how what we're pitching as a solution solves someone's problem. And often it's quite easy to contextualize a solution, especially something like a Tableau dashboard that has a bunch of data as, well, if this person has this tool, then they can make better decisions. But you have to really be able to articulate the process, what people are doing, thinking, deciding along each step of the way before you can sit down and say, here, let me provide something to you. And for folks on the line who have been used to working in startup companies or in agile organizations, that probably sounds quite straightforward, and you might do a lot of that now, but there's still a large part of the industry where those processes and procedures and ways of thinking are quite new. And so there's a lot of change management that's included and involved when you start asking people to think holistically around processes rather than around individual departments.
I would love to sit here and keep talking about all this forever, but I've noticed we have some brilliant questions from our wonderful audience. I want to throw a couple of these and we'll try and speed through as many as we can. Perhaps I'll throw this one to Karim first. Janan has asked, with decision-making groups becoming bigger and bigger, are better decisions being made? Great question.
I actually think it depends on the context. It depends on the company. It depends on which stage or which mode the company is sitting in. Is it a company that is thriving and trying to accelerate their growth? Is it a company that is trying to optimize and survive in an economy where they are not fitting anymore? And I think depending on where you are as a company, you need a different number of people and different number of decision makers, but also different decisions. And for me, like, there's no perfect decision, but there is an early decision and there is the most effective decision for the company at this stage. I remember this story. It was from a TED Talk from Malcolm Gladwell about the spaghetti sauce epiphany. I don't know if you know the story, but it's basically a company that was trying to reduce kind of like cost, but also try to be very consumer focused. And the initial idea was to really start with one sauce that is perfect and would align for every single consumer. And they end up realizing after this consumer research they did that the best decision for them to do is actually have tens and tens of sauces rather than one, because going into one egg in one all the eggs in one basket was a wrong decision for them. So again, it's about what are you trying to achieve as a company, which stage you are at, and what are you trying to solve for right now for your business.
And we have another question from Charles. Has the state of decision-making become easier with today's technology or more complex? I don't know who wants to take that one.
I mean, I'll give you a one-word answer. I think it's easier, but I will qualify that to say it's only easier if you've done the work to understand what supports the decision and taking your time to carefully structure the insight. Somebody's made some comments around data and information, and we can tie ourselves in knots around that, but it's kind of what I think it's the 4 R's. I always get lost on how many R's there are, but the right information at the right time to the right person through the right channel will get you a decision. That's just common sense. If you haven't done the work to understand those 4 R's, then you're probably going to blast somebody with information. So you need to be able to present it to them in a way they can make a decision on. But once you've done that, the decision-making process should be simple because you've given them all of the structured insight, and then the decision should be something that flows naturally from there. But the human in the loop is a complex thing, so it's never that easy to actually resolve that. But in my logic-minded head, that's how it should work, and that's how I can see it working as well.
And we have one more, and I'm going to take a question from Christy and shoot it to Kristen. How can we alter the information we provide businesses to account for the diversity of the decision-making groups?
Okay, how can we alter the information we provide businesses to account for the diversity of the decision-making groups? Well, that's a hard one. No, I think so. So I think diversity is an interesting question here, and in tying it to the 2 questions before, what I've been thinking a lot about is that the decision-making group itself should not and does not need to be very large. Often you don't have that many people who have the ability to sign off and make a decision on something. But that being said, the group that needs to be engaged to provide the information in order to make the decision should be as broad and diverse as possible. And I think the technologies that we use in order to capture that information, to Pete's point, make that much easier. What we use in order to simplify that information, et cetera, really helps with ensuring that we're bringing in diversity of thought into that process. But I think what we really need to ensure that we're doing is having full coverage over everything that impacts the decision and the objective of the decision that we're trying to reach. And that overall comprehension of data pools should ensure diversity of both information, kind of thought and perspective.
I'm glad you nailed the team build up, because I think the diversity of the team creating the data, understanding the biases you might have built into it, understanding how to present it in a way that somebody can consume is so vital to making it consumable by the audience you're trying to give it to. And you don't realize that because you think it's all just data, it's all going to flow, but people have different lenses and perspectives of it that you, and certainly I'm a mid-50s guy living in England. I've got no sense of what a 20-year-old living in America is going to think. I need those sorts of insights in order to color and structure what I'm trying to provide to them for decision-making purposes. Great answer, Kristen. Sorry, I wasn't trying to mansplain. I felt really bad about that once I've said it out loud. So I'm so sorry.
Normally a 20-year-old living in America, just so everyone's clear on that. But I don't think that was the intention.
Well, thank you. That's all we have time for. Thank you for your wonderful questions, audience. I hope you've enjoyed the panel, and thank you to my amazing panelists. We hope you have enjoyed this, and go off and make better decisions.
Absolutely. I have to introduce our next session at the same time as we wrap up this session. Thank you so much for actually this panel. I have to introduce Keith Barry, actually. And the way I want to introduce that is also a connection with the last topic, which is kind of like the experience and also, I would say, the gut feel that we have to put sometimes in making decisions, because sometimes it's important. And I want to say that there's no magic sprinkle. There's no magic dust. The true magic is inside your mind. So we are about to meet Keith Barry, the brain hacker, a world-renowned Irish mentalist, magician, and subconscious mind specialist. Let's see what Keith has on his mind for us today. See you on the other side of the sessions. Talk to you very soon.